So I think you all know what the main topic of this interview is, and that is how to survive linear algebra.
Yes, my first bit of advice would be learn your definitions. The core concepts are what will help you in the assignments, and understanding the really basic definitions of the objects and stuff that you've got that you're dealing with in a question. And then also engaging with like the community. So something that I really found helpful was Tom made a meme page. I found that really useful because everyone was basically talking about how much they were struggling with different things and how hard they found it. And I think that was incredibly useful, because if you don't have that, it's really easy to just think everyone else understands this and I don't know what I'm doing and I'm an idiot. Whereas if you know that actually loads of other people are struggling as well, then you feel a lot less like that and it's easier to get on with it. So yeah, I would say learn your definitions and then also access the kind of peer support.
I think I would like to build on top of what Becky just said, especially about the community kind of thing. I find it very helpful when learning anything when I feel like I'm doing it alongside other people and I'm not just alone in all of this, because it gives you other people to talk to while you're doing it and relate to, maybe with any struggles you're having with it.
I would suggest to be consistent, because this linear algebra is very packed course, and it just takes time to go through concepts and on this material. So if you leave it by the end before assessment, I don't think a person would make it.
What I found was keeping on top of work. I think if you start the semester and you study last minute for everything, then you're going to get tripped up with that. So linear algebra builds on topic by topic. So if you don't understand something, you're going to get insecure about it. And each time it comes up, you'll get stressed out. So like, for example, Gaussian elimination, which we started in the semester, comes up time and time again. And it's actually a tool by the end of it that you like using. So it's really important that you understand that. So just, make sure that you study up each time it comes up.
I was also going to library during the COVID time just to study to get the different space, and it somehow changed the mental space too, if it makes sense. So yeah, it's very helpful.
Uni is important, getting good grades are important, but your well-being is more important than all of that. And if you're not keeping yourself well physically and mentally, then you're not going to be able to perform well. So, getting a good night's sleep, doing exercise, taking time away from studying to do things that you enjoy, because otherwise you're going to find yourself as a burnt out husk within a couple of weeks and you're not going to be able to do well. So just generally keeping yourself well is, the way that I like to think about it is, sleep is productive, because if I don't sleep, then I can't think well. So that's what I like to say to myself when I go to bed at 9 o'clock, because it is productive. I actually had the interesting experience of I didn't really make any friends in my first year. I really struggled with that when it was in person, but when it went online, I actually made quite a few friends. Again, just different styles of doing things and working for people. I hope that what they'll go back to next year is we'll have some of the online, discussions, and Discord is now a massive thing across lots of societies, so that's really helpful. My one piece of advice in terms of friendships is, if you're an introvert, make friends with an extrovert, and then they will find you lots of friends. I managed to help someone with maths, became friends with her. She's friends with everyone, so then I managed to make friends through her. That's how I do it.
I actually had quite a similar experience to you, Becky, where I also began in 2019 in first year, where everything was on campus. And I actually also struggled to make friends during that time as well. And then after everything was online, I actually had somewhat of an easier time making friends, because I suppose there's a way that it's kind of easier for me to do it online. The thing that I find about doing it on campus is, I do think it's harder than doing it online, and in like a certain kind of way. I think when you're online, it's harder in the sense that it's hard to motivate yourself and discipline yourself, and retain that sort of sense of community. But at the same time, on-campus learning can be maybe more physically demanding in a way. Like, for example, for me, I live at home and my commute to campus is like an hour on the bus and an hour back, which takes quite a lot of time out of my day. But at the same time, I think I kind of need that for myself, because if I was given the option between online learning and on-campus learning, I think I would probably find myself falling back on the online stuff a lot, because I would, for one thing, it would allow me to avoid that commute I have to make every day. But I think in the end that would actually kind of end up detrimental for me because of all the problems that I've mentioned before that I have with online learning. I think I kind of need to get to that getting outside. So maybe part of me just needs forced to do that in a way.
Like, how do you prepare for a lecture in advance?
I would say that I don't really prepare for a lecture. I don't tend to read the stuff for that lecture beforehand because I don't find that I have time. I generally focus on like the previous lecture. So like between one lecture and the next, I'll spend that time focusing on what we learned in the first lecture and consolidating that and making sure that that's down, and then kind of go into the new lecture without really having looked at what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of similar to that. I don't really prepare for lectures in advance. I think one thing that helps me a lot though is that I also do just myself like have a passing interest in maths anyway, and sometimes like in my free time, I'll watch math videos on YouTube and things like that, or just read about it. So sometimes when I'm in lectures, sometimes it's stuff that maybe I've heard of before, but maybe never learned exactly like what it actually is, the details of what this is. But because like I've heard about it before and just in passing, I think that makes it easier to it gives me an easier time taking it in, because it doesn't feel completely unfamiliar to me, so I appreciate that's maybe not something that everybody has, but it's something that helps me a lot.
Yes, well, I definitely tried to read the lecture notes and go through the videos before the lecture, so I kind of knew what was coming. I wasn't like really surprised in the lecture or didn't know what was going on. So I kind of had a rough idea of what was going on beforehand. And then I would tackle like the tutorials. I'd start the tutorial, but I wouldn't fully finish it until after the lecture. And then I had the opportunity to ask questions with that as well. So yeah, I would try my best to make sure I've at least looked at the lecture notes and the videos before the lecture.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say do as well. That's pretty much the best way to do it. Even if it's just a brief look over what you're about to come and do, it'll help you so that you're not understanding what the professor's saying.
So during the linear algebra online studies, I did not prepare at all. It was not necessary because we had some material which we had to go through during the week, and I went through it, and well, that was it basically. But looking back at the face-to-face learning, I did like prepare. Before I read some material beforehand before going to lecture, especially if it was some challenging course, then it would be like more helpful for me to be present during the lecture. That's what I did.
Do you have any advice for students on how to really study the notes? Do you have any specific methods that you use? Also for the tutorials?
Yeah, so I would read through the lecture notes, and then I would make sure I understood all the proofs, because I think that's quite important. So I'd go through them, maybe like even write them out so I kind of like understand what's going on. But with the examples, I'd make sure that I'd write those out, because even if I kind of read through it and think I know it, it's when I actually physically go and write it out, that's when I fully understand what was going on and what happened there. So yeah, the examples are quite important and the proofs are quite important in my opinion. So I would make sure I went through them quite thoroughly.
Yeah, that's definitely a good thing to do. I think the nice thing as well with the course is the layout is pretty easy to follow. So if you stick to it, you should be able to kind of get a grip of what you're doing.
Yeah, I think just like after the lecture was over, I'd make sure I understood the material for that week, because it's always building on that throughout the semester, as Jennifer mentioned. So you just want to make sure you understand what was covered that week, and then you're good to go for the next week and progress from then on.
Yeah, I mean, even just a few minutes cementing your understanding, it'll help you a lot when the assignments come up.
Personally, on flashcards, I would say definitions, important theorems that you just need to know. So like, what is a basis? What is a vector space? Like having that so that you can have that in your mind for the more kind of like complex things to do with those objects. On the back of that, for tutorials are really helpful. My main piece of advice with tutorials, honestly, would be attempt it before you go into the tutorial session. Because if you attempt it in the session, you're not going to have a good list of questions. What I like to do is, I'm not going to finish it and I'm not going to, necessarily do greatly well at it, but I try it beforehand. And then I write a post-it note or a list of questions for Tom or whoever the PhD student is. And then the moment that I'm there, I put my hand up straight away and I get the person to come over and talk me through everything that I don't understand.
Do you take the time to ask questions during a lecture or during a tutorial? Would you say this is really important to you guys, or it has been okay, but you wouldn't really do it?
Yeah, I ask questions a lot. I in this course specifically, I bugged Tom a lot. Like every tutorial I would go in and I was just like, come on, Tom, got a list for you. No, if I don't understand something completely or I have a question, I try to just like, even if I think it's a stupid question, just ask it anyway. Just like, it's better to be sure about it than like, oh, I don't know about this. And I mean, from my experience, whether it's a lecturer or a PhD student, they're all really nice and like they want to answer your questions.
I think I myself, I can be a little bit stubborn when it comes to asking questions, because if I realize that maybe there's something happening during a lecture that I'm not quite following, or maybe there's something in the notes that I haven't quite grasped yet, I think before I actually ask a question about it, I try to I'm really stubborn about trying to figure it out myself first, and actually take the time to, try and answer this question for myself rather than immediately offloading that question on somebody else. But I mean, during times where that might not be reasonable, like maybe you just don't have enough time to, or maybe if it's during a lecture, which can be quite fast paced, and maybe you'll forget later on that you were confused about this thing, I definitely find it helpful to ask questions. Sometimes when it comes to asking questions, I can be a little bit, I mean, especially during a lecture, when it comes to asking questions, I can be a little bit afraid of interrupting the flow of the lecture. I don't know if anybody else feels that. I think it would be helpful to have some kind of reassurance that that's not something that will happen, or maybe it will lead on to some kind of more important, some important discussion during the lecture as well. Like if you have some question, maybe it's also a question that a lot of other people are having as well. So maybe it is worth talking about anyway.
Yeah, I would definitely be less likely to ask something during a lecture. And I think you make a really good point about trying to solve things yourself, which is kind of what I was in terms of trying the tutorial beforehand, giving it your shot, finding out what doesn't work, trying it, and then writing down if you're still stuck on it and you want clarification or an extra explanation. I would say I don't really interrupt during lectures unless it's a smaller lecture or unless nobody else is, I don't know, talking, or it depends on the class. Other than that, I would, if I had a question, write it down at the side and wait for an opportunity outside of that. So I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I was during the lecture. He was a good professor, but I sort of asked a question without thinking, and he's like, what? I don't understand what you're saying at all. And it was like, okay, yeah, this actually does not make sense.
Maybe one just small question about this, and then we move on to a slightly different subtopic. But when you read the lecture notes specifically, do you redo all the examples? in the notes for yourself? And do you read all the proofs?
No and no. I don't have time to read every single proof. I remember there was a section in linear algebra notes on like volume and its relationship to determinant, and it was like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. It wasn't in any of the tutorial sheets. It wasn't in any. It was just like extra bit on the end, and I was like, yeah, no. But like, if it's a proof that you can make sense of fairly easily, yes. If it's a really important concept, yes. If it's something that I'm struggling to understand and I want a bit extra like on it, then yes, I'll take the time to go through it. Other than that, though, no. And probably similar to the examples, I don't do the examples myself unless I'm stuck on a tutorial question that's similar and I need to understand it more. So really only if I'm stuck.
I find it quite funny that you specifically mentioned that example of the proof in the notes of like deriving the determinant from first thinking about this volume of parallelepiped or something. That's a very fun word, by the way, parallelepiped. But anyway, yeah, because that was actually one of the first things that popped into my mind when I heard that. And for a few reasons. One is because, no, I don't go through every single proof, even though I think I would like to. I just don't find myself dedicating so much time to studying that I have enough time to actually go through all of that. But that and that proof in particular is one that I also did not end up going through and understanding the details of completely, but I would like to return to it maybe sometime whenever I'm feeling like, oh, I want to get myself a deeper understanding of linear algebra as a subject, because I think when I was like first learning all of the concepts from linear algebra, like matrices and determinants and all of that, and you were provided with all these definitions for what these things are. But I think maybe one of the deeper questions I had when I was presented with all this is, what is actually the motivation behind all this? Like, who thought to define a matrix? Who thought to define a determinant? Like, how did this thought even come into somebody's head in the first place? Like, I understand that if we define this determinant thing, from that, what follows is you can get some nice theorems about how to characterize when a matrix has an inverse or not, and plenty of other things. It turns out to be very useful, but maybe one of the but something that can kind of be a barrier to understanding that is when you're first introduced to it and you're like, where does this all come from?
Yeah, I remember this proof of determinant and relationship to volume. I was actually very interested to learn about this, to understand this proof, and I started doing it, but it really took so much time. I could not finish it, but still I would like to return to as well to understand. And in terms of doing examples, when going through notes, I try to do example first by myself. I really try to push it, but then if I get stuck, I will read how it's done underneath the example. In this way, I feel like my mind latches much better on this concepts, and I understand it much better afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe see you around on campus.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
See you about.
Bye.
Bye.
I almost kind of think about it like a debate.
If you've messed up on something, it is absolutely essential that you know what you've done wrong.
I know that X is true, and because X is true, this implies that Y is true.